apologetics, and more. We're making education, families, and America great again. Here's Ray.
Welcome to Ray Moore Live. I am E. Ray Moore, and it's a pleasure to be with you again today. We're on every day, Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. to 11:30, and we're reaching out with the message of Christian education, homeschooling, apologetics, prayer, revival, all these kinds of related topics. And we're going to have a really good program for you today, and I'll introduce it as we go along in a few minutes. We're blessed to have today with us Kevin Novak, who is a good friend and a colleague in this important ministry and battle that we're in. So let me take a few minutes and give you his biographical information. Kevin is an attorney at law and a graduate of Liberty University Law School in Lynchburg, Virginia, and he studied under the eminent constitutional scholar and our friend and supporter, Jeff Pomala, who was the academic dean there for many years. And of course, he had many other outstanding professors at Liberty. And we want to put a little plug in for Liberty Law School. We think they're doing excellent work and turning out a whole new crop of Christian attorneys who really get it and understand what needs to be done in law and in the church and in culture. All right, Kevin has been a homeschool administrator and the president of a program or an organization called Deconstructing the Coliseum, and he'll go into that and explain that as we get along. He's licensed in the bar in the state of Texas and Virginia, and he focuses on education issues, including defending homeschoolers. He believes that homeschooling is part of the offensive weaponry that we have in the spiritual and cultural war for our nation and for the church and for the family. He discourages man-centered humanistic religion that arbitrarily excludes Christ from the law and from education. He's been featured on a number of radio programs and podcasts. He's been interviewed in the American Family Association, Kevin Swanson's Generations, and Janet Medford, which is really a great talk show. And he's been on there once and was informed recently that they replayed the program, and he's getting ready to go on again in July. So he's getting some good outreach. He's a commentator in the movie Escaping Common Core. And importantly, he's got a book we're going to talk about today, and he runs a program called the Great Education Forum. So welcome, Kevin Novak.
Great. Thanks, Ray. It's good to be here. It's good to interact with you a little.
All right. Well, hey, he's can we put his photo up, Jared? Okay. That's up. All right. Kevin is interacting on the phone, but we have his photo posted so you can see what he really looks like and that he really does exist. He's going to talk now first a little bit about what Deconstructing the Coliseum is. It's an interesting title, and at first it kind of catches people a little bit. What is that? So tell us what it is and kind of give us why you picked that particular term.
Sure. Well, first I'll talk about why I picked it. When I was in law school, I had a sports talk show, and I titled it Deconstructing the Coliseum. So it had a kind of Roman humanistic connotation to it in trying to talk about sports from a Christ-centered perspective. So that's where the name originally came from. And then when I began doing education work, I looked at the title and thought, well, that could work. And it already had some traction to the title, and so I imported it into the education ministry. So Deconstructing the Coliseum is an organization that essentially teaches people that the civil government does not have the right to be involved with education. And there are a number of different ways to say that. Even logically, there are different ways to approach it, positively and negatively. Other ways of saying what I do. I teach people that the civil government has no jurisdiction over the heart and the mind. I teach people that the civil government has no right to be discipling our children. I teach people that the civil government has no God-given right to use force and coercion to advance thought. And so I do these teachings through a number of different mechanisms. I go to homeschool conventions and talk to people that are already homeschooling and just make sure that they understand they need to teach their children about what it is I'm telling them. I also speak at homeschool conventions. I'll speak locally, oftentimes at political groups like Tea Party meetings and so on. I wrote the book, which we can talk about here in a few moments. Ray, you mentioned the annual Great Education Forum. That's another mechanism that we use to spread the message. And then also, of course, I do interviews. I'll be on Janet Mefford's show again on July 6th. That date is pending. So that's really it in a nutshell. The organization is, hey, the civil government should not be operating schools, and what it comes down to is there shouldn't be such a thing as public schools.
Right, good. And we certainly agree with that. We started the Exodus Mandate officially and formally in 1997, and I had that view, and from time to time I promulgated it. But when my original charter was set up, we pretty well concentrated on giving a theological, biblical, practical, academic argument why Christians and churches should not be in the state-sponsored public school system at all. And that we should be equipping and discipling our children exclusively through K-12 Christian schools and home schooling, which is Bible-based and Christ-centered. And we periodically would, I would say things in interviews like, God has ordained the family and the church to be the principal educators and not government. But I didn't have it articulated and laid out so well as Kevin has done. And he's come along in the last, 4 or 5 years with this and this argument and this book. It's not really new, but he has put it in a popular form and has the book, which is just really profound. And we are distributing it, circulating it, and trying to get it into the hands of Christian leaders. Let me say also that we've got a coalition of some 30, 35 organizations or ministries that are working in this vineyard. Kevin is one. We talked about Jay Justino. There are many others, Paul Dorr, Isaac Moffitt, Brian Ray. It goes on and on. The wonderful leaders that God is raising up around the nation to carry a piece of the puzzle. But I will say that this argument and book and thesis that Kevin has is really the sort of the capstone of what we need to do. If we get our kids out as Christians out of the public school system and having and home schooling and Christian schooling, and that cancer of state-sponsored public schools hang on in the culture, it still can be corrupting and damaging to the entire culture and to non-Christian children as well. So this is a logical extension of the argument that we've made with Exodus Mandate for years. And Kevin is a young man. How old are you now, Kevin?
I'm 42, so
okay.
He's
very mature. He's got the maturity of a 60-year-old. But the good news is that he's a graduate of Liberty University Law School in the last few years. It's probably been 10 years since you went there. I just lost track.
Yeah, it's been a while. It goes fast.
And he's a family man, got a beautiful wife and 3 children, got twins. And we're excited about the future that he represents with this movement. I hope to be around another 10 years working in this venue, but I have to admit, at 74, my time may be short. And I look around and I see all these young leaders, young men and young women coming along that are picking up the torch. And I know that this movement that's been going on for 20 or 30 years will continue because of the dynamic leaders that we have in the future. Let's take a minute now and talk about your book, Kevin. Tell us about the
Okay.
book.
Well, the book, it's titled Abolition and subtitled Overcoming the Christian Establishment on Education. And the book really weaves in a lot of different.
Do we have a picture of it, Jared? Put it up on the screen.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can buy it on Amazon. So the book seems like it's earth-shattering. Oh, wow, this is new information. Really what I did was I packaged and wove together things that I learned from other people and just reintroduced into society, into mainstream, this truth that the civil government shouldn't be operating public schools, because obviously this used to be the norm. I mean, when we look back 150 years ago, and generally throughout human history, the norm is that education was a private endeavor. So the book starts out in talking about ultimate authority, how we should view where policy should come from and principles and all that. And then the book talks about jurisdiction, which is just a basic term. Juris meaning law and diction meaning to speak. So speaking law comes from God. All our principles in every area of life come from God. And then applying that to family, church, and state. And then looking at what the family, church, and state are each supposed to do, and that the civil government, the state, is limited in what they can do. Essentially, Romans 13, that is, the civil government is supposed to be involved with punishing evildoers and promoting good, not providing good. So they're limited in that regard. And then finally, I would say the climax of the book is talking about this Christian establishment, which, as we all know, has existed for some time. I just put my finger on it and gave it a label in light of what we are going through on the federal level with the Republican establishment and the D.C. establishment, sometimes colloquially referred to as the swamp. So there's kind of a Christian swamp where you get a lot of Christian leaders that they're okay with the status quo. You know, they make 50, 60 grand just to preach and not to make waves, and they're not going to put their name on any review of any new earth-shattering books unless it has to do with individual morality. You know, so there's this Christian establishment that's just okay with the status quo. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not good enough. Those people need to resign, get out of the way, or whatever. And so that is a big thing with the book is the Christian establishment, these Christian leaders are gatekeeping a revival because they don't want to talk about education. They think it's divisive. They think it's controversial. It could affect offerings and so on. And so I call these people out on it. And anyone, I will say that any Christian leader that does not want to deal with education, they don't want to talk about homeschooling, discipleship, the civil government's role in indoctrinating our kids. They don't want to touch it. I think those people are part of the Christian establishment. So finally, the book talks about productive ways, not just being negative, but proactive and telling people what they can do on a practical level, on a day-to-day basis, what they can do to promote Christian education.
Okay, good. Well, we've had a similar theme here, and even last week or so, we mentioned maybe a week ago the Christian establishment, and have been in the ministry over 40 years, and sometimes when you're doing a project or something, you just assume more people are with you than are.
Mm-hmm.
But I brought out maybe a week ago that ACSI, that's the Association of Christian Schools International, did a study on the support of conservative pastors for Christian schooling. They were looking primarily at K-12 Christian schooling, and they found only 9% of conservative pastors very strongly supported Christian schooling, with another 20% moderately supportive. And I think by that they mean that they may have their children in Christian schools and be homeschooling, and they may speak favorably of it. They may recommend it, but they're not really in any way crusading for it like you and I are. This is this is my main mission in life. And But I do know pastors that are very strongly support me, but it makes up about 9 or 10% of the conservative pastors. That's a pretty shocking statistic. And then you have about 30% from the ACSI study that do not support Christian education, that is K-12. And of course, they think Sunday school is Christian education. Yeah, that's right. 1 hour a week, and the liberals have them 30 hours a week in public school. But anyway, they consider ACSI. When I talked to the one of the top administrators, he said we consider that opposition to Christian schooling. 30% of conservatives. So we've got a problem because the leaders are not leading. And your book well points it out and fingers it, and you've got to deal with it. We cannot advance this movement until we get more of the pastors on board. So, give me a little bit more on the book, and we hardly recommend it. And if you can get it on Amazon, we urge you to do it. But if you can't, for some reason, I know you can. We have them in the office, and we're promoting it, and we're giving it to leaders all the time.
Yeah, there are a number of people that I hear from, and they say, "Wow, I just can't believe it." I like you alluded to a few moments ago, Ray. Sometimes you come across sometimes you assume other people are in support of you, or other people think the same things you do. And we can't make that assumption. And the book, I think, tries to quantify and articulate the things that we talk about. I hear from people who just are so thankful that someone else could put into words what they think, and now they can go and advance that information. And I benefited from that too, when other people put down on pen and paper. You mentioned Kerry Morgan before, when I read his book, and it was so helpful to me. And so anyway, I do hear from a lot of people that utilize the book as an evangelistic tool. They'll buy several at a time and just distribute them. And of course, we distribute the book as much as we can. But the book is getting out there. It's being spread. And maybe one of these days it'll just catch fire. But the thing is, and this is one of the emphases I have in the book, it's an implied emphasis, but it's that we can actually, in just dealing with Christians, we can win this thing. We don't need to convince liberals necessarily that they're wrong. We just need to deal with our side of the equation, Christians, and get everybody on board to understand that Christian children need Christian education. And once we can do that, then I don't think anyone can stop us. Because if we had Christian leaders, and then more specifically Christian preachers, talking about this every week, all the time, and emphasizing it and weaving it into their church's culture, you and I wouldn't need to be doing this. We would really have so much momentum. We wouldn't be giving our children to the opposition, and then also we wouldn't be giving our money to the opposition, because not only do public school children learn anti-Christianity, we pay for it. Christians pay for that. And so if we can get the Christians on our side, even just 5, 10, 15% to get out and then begin a movement to get our money back, we can have tremendous momentum, and I think we can also experience a revival. And the book addresses things like that. And then one other thing the book addresses, which is huge, is just some of the counter-arguments. I don't go too much into like salt and light and all that, because I think those arguments, I think, have already been won. But in terms of people saying, well, this is a political movement, I get that a lot. This is not a political movement, what I'm doing. To say that the civil government is limited is not political in nature, it's cultural. Because all that is to say that the other side is such that the family in church should be larger. But they're mutually exclusive. When you pit the civil government against the family in church, it's a zero sum. And so it's a cultural movement to say that the civil government should be smaller. And that's another big thing that I talk about in the book.
Yes, we have mentioned Christians would question, and I make an analogy, a story. This, of course, is ridiculous and it would never happen, but I use it for illustration purposes. Let's say the state of Virginia or Georgia or New York passed a law one day and said that in the future, your clergy will not be necessary to provide the sacraments and the ordinances of the church. We have appointed the garbage men and the trash men to come to your churches on the Lord's Day and offer the sacraments. Now, that's a pretty absurd statement, I know, but what would the church say? Would they say, well, I guess if they take a bath and put on clean clothes, it'll be all right? No, we would be up in arms over it. And
Right.
That's what they've done with the children. They have no authority, biblically speaking, to be educating children. And yet we hand them over to the state, and they're destroying our heritage. So let's move. We've got a little bit of time left. We want to talk about the Great Education Forum. And I participated in that since the beginning. And Kevin is the president of it. And it's a great thing. And tell us what that is and what it does and how they can participate.
Yeah, so it's another mechanism that we utilize to spread the message of Christian children need Christian education. Of course, Deconstructing the Coliseum is the sponsor of the annual Great Education Forum. This will be our fourth year on August 18th in Appomattox, Virginia. And not everyone present has a ministry that promotes abolishing the civil government school system. But what I do is the logical negative. The civil government is limited. What the other ministries do, like yours, Ray, is you just do the logical positive. Christian children ought to be given a Christian education. So, of course, all these organizations work hand in hand, and every year we bring in new speakers, sometimes the same. Ray, you've been involved with it every year, and you'll be the MC this year. But we try to bring in new speakers and not necessarily new ideas, although there are some, but just people that can properly talk about Christian education. So every year at the Great Education Forum, we have a theme. This year's theme is leadership in Christian education. So yeah, that can sound vague, but really it's pinpointing. It's specifically identifying what Christian leadership ought to look like in Christian education. So we will talk about things like, should Christians go into civil government schools and be salt and light? Jay Jacino is going to talk about that. And we'll talk about education leadership and it beginning at home. Reverend Dr. Paul Michael Raymond will be there, and he will be talking about reestablishing biblical education. And there'll be some practical things that will be discussed that won't just be these vague ideas that when they do come from the church, they really aren't helpful. So this year, starting at, I believe it's 11 o'clock, is when it starts on August 18th. I'll give the opening remarks. Ray, you'll be the MC, and then we'll have 5 men give presentations on different topics. The website, deconstructingthecoliseum.com, on the top right, there's a link for a GEF, Fourth Annual Great Education Forum, where people can go and get more information. If you're not able to attend in person and make your way to Appomattox, Virginia, you'll be able to watch online via sermonaudio.com, and there's a link for that on the website. Last year we had, I want to say it was about 100 people watching remotely, and it was great. So this year we expect it to be bigger and better than last year.
We've got a lot of young and some old dynamic leaders in this movement. We also use the forum that Kevin runs to sort of present some new ideas and new strategies for the movement. It's not interactive, but it gives us a chance to put some position papers out and that sort of thing. I spoke last year on the topic, what once was can be again, Christian education and the Reformation. And if you're interested in going back and seeing my last year's presentation, it's on my webpage at exodusmandate.org. You'll have to scroll down to the bottom right, and you can see actually a live. Well, it's not live; it'll be a recorded presentation. It's only a half hour long, so anybody can give a half hour to something. And I also got a chance, as Kevin knows, to give that same address at Liberty University in September of last year during their 500th anniversary of the Reformation. So I'm excited about that. I worked on it for months, and it's getting around. Also want to make a little bit of comment. Kevin has taken this idea and popularized it, and really probably the best little book of its kind. But he did. We have constitutional scholar Kerry Morgan has written a book years ago called Real Choice and Real Freedom in Education. Is that the title?
Yes, Real Choice, Real Freedom
in Education. And he's a good friend of this movement and a close personal friend of Kevin, and I know him as well. And then also former academic dean at Liberty University is teaching this at the law school, and he's coming out with a book, and maybe it's already out, on constitutional case law. And he's got 4 chapters dealing with this. And then Herb Titus, who was the founding dean at Regent Law School, makes these same arguments. So the point I want to make is Kevin's not alone. He's not unique in it, but he's just taken and popularizing and pushing it out there in a way that they have not done. But they laid help with a lot of the scholarship and the arguments. And so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, and it, there are a lot more people behind this movement than one might realize. I'll just quickly point out that when I go to homeschool conventions, and granted, obviously it's a more friendly environment, but you'd be surprised at how people look immediately at what I do, and they just say right off the bat, "Hey, I'm in for that. I'm in favor of that." And we've got millions of homeschoolers. In light of all the bad things, some evil things that are happening in public schools, even liberals are beginning to realize that the civil government is doing what they should not be doing, and they're the source of the problem.
Right. We've got a few minutes left, and we'll take a few questions or rebuttals or complaints, but mostly we get positive feedback. All right. Anybody want a question for Kevin? This is a good opportunity for you, and we'd like you to pray for him. He's got an important ministry and organization, and frankly, when I look at what's going on in the total scheme of things, this has got to be one of the top 2, 3, 4 things that we're seeing anywhere in the country, and it needs to grow. It must expand. It must catch on in a bigger way if we're going to be successful. All right, anybody out there want to complain or make a comment?
Hey, Kevin, I've got a quick question about a 2-part question. What's the biggest obstacle you find in pursuing this avenue of helping the American culture? And then also so that's the biggest obstacle. And then also, who or where do you find the biggest boon on your efforts? So who prevents you the hardest from getting your message out? And then where do you find the most support?
Okay, well, the biggest the biggest point people make is, what about poor people? And I'll just illustrate. I'll try to do this quickly. In Atlanta, a couple hours from where I am, years ago, there was a big scandal with cheating on tests. Administrators were cheating on tests, and they were trying to make their schools look good. And I heard an interview on this by a parent, and the parent said, "Well, I need these public schools because I want my child to be able to get out of poverty." And, on its face, that sounds really good, but if you think about it, that woman being interviewed probably went to a public school, and if her child is poor, it stands to reason that the mother is poor. So if you put those two things together, it's like, well, if public schools are a solution to poverty, well, why is it that you're still poor? And so we have to logically parse through these things. So what about poor people is the biggest obstacle? That is very easily dealt with. The civil government has our money. We need to get it back. In regards to people who are, I guess maybe you're asking about people who are in the way. I would say preachers generally, obviously the Christian establishment, but if I'm to pick one part of that, it would be preachers, in that they just really don't want to talk about this thing. We could see a revival probably within months, if preachers just started talking about this even mildly and bringing attention to it, not even taking a position on it necessarily, but just talking about the civil government and their limitations. And people in the audience might put two and two together and think, yeah, that really does make sense, that the civil government doesn't have the right to use force and coercion to advance thought. And we went through this with every single colony when they abolished their churches, their state-established churches. So there's an analogy there. So I think it's just people that are stuck on the old paradigms. You know, liberals make fun of us for like being traditional and not wanting to move and being stodgy, but I don't think that's true. I think it's just people who are afraid to really think about what's proper and then move in that direction. A lot of it is just bias and fear of change.
All right. Well, we are so happy to have Kevin Novak with us today, and we'll be promoting the Great Education Forum a few more times before August 18th. And mark your calendar if you can come to that. It's really a wonderful program. This is the fourth year we're doing it, and we need your support. I'm going to close in prayer. Didn't get a chance to open in prayer, and ask for God's blessing on Kevin and his work. Thank you, Father God, for your love and mercy and revealing your son Jesus to us through the power of the gospel. And again, we're grateful to be called into service in your kingdom. And we thank you, Lord, that you've given us things that do make a difference in your kingdom and not some little petty thing. And we're not trying to make judgment on anybody, but we know that it's easy to waste our time and not have a profound impact on your ministry and on your work. Bless Kevin, Lord, raise him up, strengthen him, provide all that he needs. Bless this book in ways that will be astounding to us as we look to the future. And we call especially your blessing upon the Great Education Forum on August 18th in Appomattox, Virginia. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, this is my story, and I'm sticking with it. God bless. We're signing off.